It is a scam when you don't allow everyone to operate on fair terms.
We are the Robin Hoods of sports betting. We take something back from the rich bookies and enable our customers to beat them instead.
Hi guys, Alex here. Welcome to episode 30 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I am joined by, yet again, another stellar guest for the podcast. His name is Toby. He's already told me how to pronounce his last name, but I'm going to try again. Aldous, is that better?
It's Aldous, but yeah, I get this a lot, don't worry.
Sorry, mate. I've had a few cracks at it and I still can't get it. But so Toby is basically the main man behind Punter2Pro, which is a betting blog, mate. Do you want to explain it probably a bit better than I can?
Yeah, so it was around sort of 2014, 2015 time, and I'd already done a bit of match betting and arbitrage betting back from when I was at uni. I sort of moved on to value betting, and I learned a little bit about that. But when I would go online to see what else was out there and what people were sort of publishing online to do with sports betting, it became like a little bit clear that there was a lot of affiliates out there for gambling companies. There was a lot of people saying sign up to this Tipster service, it will make you this amount of money, and it all seemed a little bit like it went against what I believed in and what I was seeing at my end. So I felt like I was in a bit of a bubble, and maybe like some of the information that I had learnt from, sort of professional gamblers that I kind of met at uni, I would be able to publish my own content and put my own message out there, and I think there was enough space to do that, even though there are other betting blogs similar to mine.
Yeah, no, it's a very informative site, mate. I spent a bit of time on it throughout my time betting over the years, and there's so much great information on it. I ideally, throughout this podcast, mate, I'd love to go through some of the best articles you produce, or in my eyes, some of my favourite articles I got to read. But at the moment, mate, is there anything in particular you're working on, or is it just Punter2Pro full-time, trying to make that blog as good as possible?
So I'll probably spend about a quarter of my time on Punter2Pro. I actually do quite a lot of stuff with sports equipment, so I create and sell sports equipment and sell it via the FBA, Amazon FBA program. So I've been doing that since around 2013 sort of time, and there came a point where I sort of almost left betting behind a little bit, and I shifted more of my focus and energy onto Amazon FBA stuff, and also other blogs. I've got a couple of other blogs which I run. One of them's actually about goalkeeping, so again sports related, and the two main products that I sell are goalkeeping gloves and table tennis bats. So it's sort of weirdly, maybe slightly coincidentally, links to sport, but I don't think it was actually intended that way. I think that was more of a coincidence actually, but yeah.
Nice, you're a man of many talents.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention actually there's an aviation brand. I don't fly, but I do create equipment for people learning to fly. So there's certain equipment. Looks a bit like this headset. I don't do headsets, but yeah. I feel like a pilot while I'm wearing this. So.
Yeah. No, awesome, mate. All right, that's great. It's awesome that you're doing lots of different things, and I'm surprised that you only spent a quarter of the time on Punter2Pro, because it's very, very informative blog. And obviously your blog isn't just about value betting or just about tipsters. Like, it's about an array of betting topics. And I think I wanted to ask you this question off the top, and I know it's a very ambiguous question. There's lots of nuts and bolts to this question, I guess. But if you're looking at all the ways that there's a few ways that are proven you can make money, but I guess from betting at least. But if you're looking at all the ways that people try to make money from betting, so we're talking match betting, arbitrage betting, value betting, exchange trading, and then also tipsters. We've got a question coming out on the blog about this, where we're asking kind of all the industry experts, the article series you're a part of. That's the next question in the series, but I thought it'd be better just to ask you this one in person. What do you, out of those 5 ways, do you think there is a best way to make money?
Yeah, I do. Okay, so I think if you're really just starting out and you don't have a big bankroll, and you're kind of dipping your toes in effectively, maybe it's best to just start something like match betting, right? Obviously, it is risk-free provided that there's no hiccups along the way. So I think that's good as a starting point. But then beyond that, I am a big fan of like arbitrage betting, and a lot of people don't realise that arbitrage betting is quite similar to value betting. I know it sounds like they're polar opposites because obviously value betting means taking risk, and arbitrage you sort of nullify that risk, but effectively they're doing quite similar things in that they're finding a price discrepancy, and so in an arbitrage bet you might have two or more bets which make up that bet, but one or more of them will have value, so you are kind of still capitalizing on that value. So I kind of link the two together, but by not hedging out like you do on an arbitrage bet, it kind of means that you're, with a value bet that is, it means that value betting has got like a higher yield, generally speaking. So yeah, I put value betting at the top, and I don't I've left out Betfair exchange trading here because it's so difficult. It's so difficult to find a strategy that will win in the long run. I've seen estimates, I can't confirm these figures, but I've seen estimates which say something like 1% of people make a consistent profit over a long period of time, so only 1% of traders do that. I've also seen estimates that are lower than that, 0.5%. So while I do in principle think that like if you get good at on Betfair or one of the other exchanges, like you could automate that, and it's so much easier than fighting bookies for money and stuff like this. It could be brilliant, and that was a vision that I once had, but I struggled. I've run literally hundreds of strategies, and to get something consistent, it is hard. So I wouldn't really rank that in my list there too much. But I leave it open. I write about Betfair stuff, I write about trading. I leave it open because just because I wasn't good enough at it doesn't mean that someone else won't be.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm getting from the article series so far, just getting the answers back, and that is the article will be released next week for anyone listening. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll be released in a couple of days. But one of the general things that I am getting at the moment is that match betting is great for beginners, like you said, and also that and arbing are really good for people that don't like to risk all that much money, like really don't enjoy the variance aspect of value betting and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a lot harder to do arbing these days, a lot harder to be very profitable with that. But at the end of the day, if you're really not comfortable with value betting and having one side, not having a sure bet, I guess, then there's nothing wrong with doing match betting or arbing.
Yeah, so I think the point that you said about arbitrage and match betting having much lower risk, that's like a big thing. So for like newbies, really, so someone will often start with match betting, move on to arbitrage, because the process is so similar. When you're using the match betting calculators, sometimes you'll plug numbers in and you'll be like, oh, that makes that's an arb, like, and you can see that from the bottom, like whatever happens, it's going to make money. And so you almost learn the process of arbing without knowing the terminology behind it, and that's kind of what happened for me, where you would sort of look for the best match bet possible, and just by playing around with the numbers, you'd be like, oh, hang on, that makes money every time. There is no loss on this one. The qualifying bet makes money. Oh, wow, that's great. Must be more of those out there. And then once you learn, you can sort of graduate from that onto arbing. And then, if you've got enough of a bankroll, then, graduate further onto a value betting, provided you accept that there's wins and losses.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like I kind of thought that everyone was going to say value betting or something. I thought that would be a pretty consensus view. But it's very clear that you can't go into something and not be 100% comfortable with it. So the most important thing is that you are 100% comfortable with it. Obviously there are a couple of ways that proven to make money: match betting, arbing, and value betting, but it's all down to your personal preference at the end of the day. One thing I noticed, you didn't mention tipsters as the best way to make money, and Marius did mention to me that this might be right or wrong, maybe I've quoted him completely wrong, but he told me that you told him that throughout your blog, even though you have all this information and I guess warnings about tipsters, you're still finding that tipsters are the most popular way for people to, try and be profitable in sports betting. Is that true, and why do you think that is, mate?
Okay, yeah. This I find really interesting, and when you're running your own website, it's a case of looking at what people are actually reading on your website. So I say this to my fiance, I say it to my friends. What I like is not what everyone else likes. What I think is a great article is not what everyone else likes reading. And yeah, so I found that the articles that I wrote, even if I said something negative about tipsters and I said, look, here's all the warnings, there's a risk that a lot of the tipsters you see on social media are pulling these out of a hat. Like you can't be 100% sure of that. Some are not, some might be. Despite the warnings, people would always click onto a tipster service, or the most fascinating thing for me was I actually did an experiment. I called it the mug bet experiment, right? So I bet on every Premier League fixture on Betfair what I thought would win. So I tried to do what a gambler would do, just trying to pick winners, right? Just to see what would happen. And at the start of the experiment, I predicted that I thought I'd break even. So after commission, I thought I'd break even. And now, during this process, there was a spell where the graph sort of went up a little bit like this. Even though throughout the experiment I said, do not follow this, it's me mucking around, I'd have people say, when are you going to put the stuff up? When are you going to put the tips up? And I'd be like, they're not tips. They're the opposite of tips. Yeah, like it did have a spell where it went like this, and then it went like this, and it went straight, but you can't have it went straight back down. And it's funny really, because it actually ended up at 0.00% ROI, and it sounds like I've fiddled the numbers, but it honestly did. It came in exactly that. Now I thought that was amazing, but no one found that part amazing. They only found it amazing when it was doing this, the graph. So so that. And
what was your sample size with that experiment?
Sorry?
What was your sample size with that experiment?
It was, I think I started it just after the season started, so I think it was hundreds of games. It was something like 300. I should really check. I think it was about 300 or something like that. Okay. So so it's not a tiny sample, but it's also maybe a sample that's representative of what a regular gambler might have as a sample size that they base their yearly performance on, say. Yeah, it's true that no matter what you say, people will always have a certain attitude towards how betting works, and that's about picking winners, and it's about following tipsters, I think the idea of maybe anything more does scare people. It does intimidate people, and I think it can be a bit. It goes against a sort of belief that you know better than other people. Like you could see a football team, for example, and you could be like, I know they're going to win, and if you bet on that and then they do win, then you get that sort of confirmation bias. And I think a lot of people both like that feeling of getting it right, but also can be a little bit naive about it as well. And yeah, like I do promote a couple of tipster services that I believe are transparent in that they show all of the numbers. They show the yield, they show each of the bets, they verify each of the bets, and I promote them because I believe that there's certain people that will absolutely never venture into Betfair trading or anything that's technical, and they're best off knowing before they bet that at the very least they've got a document there which says here's the yield over X amount of time. They've got all the warnings on my website, but if they're doing it for fun, then who am I to say? I can't tell people you should bet like this, you should bet like that. That's not really what I'm about. I just give my opinions.
Yeah, I mean, but if the thing is, if they are looking to be profitable, it is surprising that they do choose tipsters, especially when you would think the majority out there are not profitable over a long period of time. I guess it's just interesting that you've got these ways of betting like match betting, arbing, value betting, and people are steering away from that. And if I had to guess why it is that people, like you were saying, that most people are choosing tipsters over any of those methods, my guess would just be complete laziness, because there's nothing easier. There's not, in terms of betting knowledge or anything like that, you don't have to do an absolute thing if you have a tipster. That tipster does it all for you. All you have to do is go and place the bet yourself. Would you say it's laziness, or do you think it's something else?
Yeah, so there was the slightly more technical, psychological reasons that I said before, but what you're saying here is, it's, and I do understand it. I get that, because the laziness part, because if you've got a regular full-time job and the weekend rolls around, you're going to have other commitments. You're not going to sit there and say, well, I'm going to spend my entire weekend for the next year looking into how to make money from sports betting. You're probably going to take a more simple approach to it. And yeah, like, don't get me wrong, like I've seen some tipster services where there are obviously discrepancies in, like, the prices are wrong, and then prices get very quickly chiseled down. So there are tipster services that are doing that, and I quite like the idea of analysing the horses before the day before, and being ready to pounce on all those prices quickly, and then the prices come into line very quickly. And there are a lot of people out there who, they might hear me or anyone say something about tipsters that's a bit slightly negative, and then they'll be like, yeah, but I've seen services that are doing this, and like that is good. But so yeah, like there's definitely an element of laziness there, but I also do understand that there are people who do find these gems out there as well, but they can be a little bit short-lived, and there's a lot of competition to get on those odds quickly enough. And yeah, I think it's difficult to consistently find that go-to guy who's going to give you these nuggets of gold or whatever,
Yeah, and going on from that, in terms of people who have full-time jobs, or people that just don't have the schedule to put in place like a 15 half an hour every day to look at the betting markets and look for picks that way. You wrote in one of your articles that it's like I said, it's very hard for people to find a time period every day to go through the markets, and that a lot of people just use like a fixed time every week. Maybe that's like a Saturday morning, maybe that's a Wednesday night, whatever, to look at the whole week ahead and place all your bets then. If you had to choose one time though, where every week you sit down for half an hour, whatever the time, and just put in all your bets for the weekend or for the week ahead. I know it's a very hard question, but would you say there's a best time to be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a hard question, because as you can tell from the article that I wrote, which I'm pleased that you found, because that's one of the ones that nobody reads. There isn't really a time that I could say, oh, you should definitely, because it depends on the sport as well. Like, as I said, maybe horse racing, you might want to get in there quite early, but with stuff like the match odds on Premier League, for example, the odds are constantly changing due to like variables like players, manager sackings, and things like that on the run up to the event. So I think that what might seem like a great opportunity at one point maybe won't be later on down the line. And yeah, it's just sport dependent. Like, I couldn't say. The one thing I could perhaps suggest, and I noticed this in that mug bet experiment, it seemed to me to be this way, was that at the start of a particular season, where we haven't yet discovered how good players and teams actually are, that as that season goes on, the odds will actually become more representative of the event. So as like I'm a Spurs supporter, and when I watch that team week in, week out, you start to get a feel for I really don't believe that seems fair based on how my team is performing. And so I do think that as the season goes on, it becomes increasingly fair, and it becomes more, wow, that's spot on. And so I think if I had to give any advice in that respect, it wouldn't necessarily be a certain time of the week or a certain time of the day or anything, but I would say when people just haven't got enough data yet, enough information, and so the whole market has not quite concluded which teams are better, which players are better, and it's a big deal with sports like that have big transfers, because there could be a player from abroad, for example, and he's absolutely amazing out there. You bring him into England, and maybe he doesn't perform right, and if that happens, then obviously your perception of how that team that he came to has been boosted by his inclusion in the team. It goes down. So yeah, it's stuff like that I would definitely advise looking at. But yeah, times of the day, not exactly.
Yeah, no, it makes sense that throughout the season the market's become more accurate, doesn't it? I guess it's similar to if you are trading on one day, the most accurate odds on the event is the closing line. It's the most accurate line because all the information's in the market. So I guess it's quite similar to that.
That's right. Yeah. I actually did a bit of an experiment on the closing line. The starting price was what we'd say here. And what I found, which a lot of pro gamblers definitely know this, is that at the point that the race or the event starts, that's where the odds are most accurate that they ever will be on average. Not every single time, but on average. So if you're able to back at much better odds than what it closes at, then you will make money.
Yeah.
And I've seen in a few forums that people have disputed it and have said that's a bit too mathsy for me. That doesn't seem like that would work. I don't believe that. But I've done 17,000 bets sample size. It is not a small sample. I've seen it over more data than that. It's just it happens that the blog post I had 17,000 sample bets in it, and it does work. Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me as well.
Yeah, no, I actually saw that article, mate, and it actually spurred me on to look at the Trademate user data too, because I don't know why, but I never thought to actually have a look at for those people who closed at a negative edge, I guess. So maybe they've placed a bet 5 hours before and the market's just moved quite swiftly and it's moved out of your favour. I looked up every edge that's closed at a negative from 0 to 2% or something like that, and I looked at the Trademate sports user data and it was all losses, from a sample size of 10,000 bets. Everyone had you ended up being not profitable, in other words. So, and then you do the adverse of that, and obviously if you get plus EV bets over and over, or ones that are above the closing line, then they were all profitable. So that kind of confirmed it for me too, even though I was 100% sure. But when you've got 10,000 and 17,000 sample size in your example, then I'm pretty sure value betting is a real thing.
Yeah, and I think that because there's more than one way to find value, it maybe complicates things for people. Because obviously there's finding value by analysing the sport, which I sort of touched on previously, analysing different variables and saying, well, that's having an impact. That's hard, very hard, and a lot of people try that approach. That's the go-to thing, is analysing stats, so the actual sport itself. But then also there's other ways where you subscribe to a feed, or you're given selections even by tipsters, and that goes and you follow those bets, and then those bets have value, but you don't necessarily know exactly how the value was identified by those people. By those companies and services.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then moving on, mate, to one of your other articles that you wrote, and not much is... obviously been around a few betting blogs, and I don't think I've ever seen an article like this before, mate. It was about how to resolve disputes with bookies, basically a 5-step guide you came up with. Mate, could you explain kind of your recommendations to everyone that's listening from that article, kind of sum it up as quick as possible? But I also found... Step 2, the most interesting, in that you suggest giving bookies an ultimatum as part of the step 2 of the process. Do you find that it actually works?
I think it depends on how dodgy the bookmaker is that you're dealing with, really. And the guide that I gave, it mainly just encourages people to keep a log of everything, to treat it as if it were like a legal case where you want to have everything that I've said versus everything that they've said. Have they responded to me? That kind of thing. Because the unfortunate thing about the sports betting world, and it is getting a little bit better now, is that sometimes the gambling regulators, the commissions who are supposed to be on the side of players, they're not really, and it is a bit of an issue. And so at the very least you're going to need to have a strong argument. So the whole point I'm making in the article really is have a strong argument, and give them an ultimatum. Say to them, I've given you every chance and you're not being reasonable. Okay, fine. And then you take it to the next step. So that's the overall message.
Yeah, no, it's a very good article, and I implore anyone to go over there and to the blog and read that article because, I guess most people coming into betting maybe don't think that they're ever going to have a situation like that, but seriously, you never know. Yeah, I've been betting for a lot of years, and it's surprising to see what kind of bookmakers are up to what kind of things. And then I'll go on to another article that you've wrote, mate. I'll just do a quick quote about this article. Basically, it was about the perceptions of gambling, I guess, by everyone. And one of your quotes was, several freelance programmers declined to work on Betfair trading programs in the fear that doing so would tarnish their CV. And then also in that article, you also talk about the TV shows that promote gambling as like a criminal activity, like your Peaky Blinders, and also certain religious views around gambling, which basically look down upon anyone that does gambling. It's a bit of a broad question, or very hard question to answer, but how far away do you think we are, mate, from someone like a pro sports bettor or just your average Joe who likes to have a bet on the weekend being looked at, or someone that's just profitable who bets every weekend that does it as a side income? How far away are we from people looking upon them and thinking, geez, he's a smart bloke, or, he's quite intellectually switched on?
It's a broad question, but as I wrote in that article, I think I might have even mentioned things like The Sopranos and stuff. Everything that you usually see in American films and even the British TV shows like Peaky Blinders, you say, is it's got a negative outlook on gambling. I do think that in recent years there has been more services which have popped up, including Trademate, that are encouraging people to treat it as like an investment, and I think that the strange thing about all this is if you've ever known any like financial traders who are like kind of generally like respected as having like an intellectual job, but when you talk with them about what it is that they do, what it is that the guy next to them does, sometimes, but not always, the stuff that they say, it's frightening. Like, it's scary. It's like, we're looking on Twitter. It's like, what? You're looking on Twitter? What, and you base £1 million deals off of that? And they're like, yeah. And but in my head, all these questions are going around. I'm thinking to myself, is the market really efficient? Is it inefficient? Are you ahead of everybody else who's doing this? How many people are betting, or how many people are trading on this same thing that you are? I think that there's sports bettors who are doing more advanced things than what a lot of financial people are doing, and they deserve the respect on an equal plane. But it will be hard to get there, but it's slowly happening, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's going to take a long time, and maybe it will be something that never ever happens, but we'll see. And I've had instances just in the office where we work at, and we only moved into this office a couple of months ago, and a certain person who's obviously had some experience in the trading market or financial trading, stock market kind of thing, kind of asked us what we do and stuff like that. We explained the whole product, and he just had this almost arrogance about him, as though like we were stupid. What are you talking about? Like, what are you young guys doing? Like, the stock market's this, the stock market's that. I don't know. Have you had any instances like that? Like, kind of like an arrogant way of talking to you in a way?
Yeah, definitely. I think that people have definitely laughed and thought, well, that's just ridiculous. Like, he's going to be broke in a week, doing that sort of thing. In the same conversation, someone was I don't know, at the time he had a lot of money, like tens of thousands on, I don't know, oil or something like that, you know, on the stock market, and it was, yeah, it seemed ironic to me. But the thing is that when people are looking down on something, they're steering away from it. It's not attracting too many people, and that's what you want. If you want to try and find an opportunity, you don't want to go where everyone is. So, provided you're okay and you're, I guess, thick-skinned enough to say, okay, fine, like I don't mind what you think, like, and you're okay with that, then yeah, I think you're the one who benefits in that respect. Provided you've actually found some sort of advantage in what you're doing, and you're not deluded and you're not just betting something crazy. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a few of the interns we have here at Trademate just before about this, and I was like, honestly, it's great that people look down upon us, because it just means less people are going to be doing betting, and the odds are going to be there for us. So maybe it's just best if the industry kind of stays the way with all these perceptions and stuff like that. And then the last article I wanted to go through was you talked about the term cold traders. I hadn't heard of this term before, to be honest, and I'd love you to explain a bit more about how someone could make money without knowing a thing about a particular sport or a particular league, because it's completely relevant to what Trademate does.
Yeah, so I touched on it briefly earlier, but it's basically the idea that you could never watch the sport, have no interest in the sport whatsoever, but you're purely looking at numbers. So I'm not specifically talking about the analytics side of the numbers, like I don't know, shots on goal for football, that sort of thing. More that when this number is bigger than this number, so one bookmaker might have this price, one might have a different price. When this is bigger than this below this, you have certain markers. Then you just go, right, I'm going to trade then, I'm going to bet then, or I'm going to lay then, or whatever it is you're doing. So it's just the idea of not really needing any background knowledge about the sport and the event. It's just a case of it's just a numbers thing. Yeah,
it's a very important concept, and maybe it's more of a so in some cases it's a better way to go about your trading, because if you're just looking at the numbers, then there's probably a better chance that you're going to find value than if you're just going off your own opinion. And I mean, like, anyone that uses Trademate Sports is the perfect example of that, because to be honest, mate, I've never really watched a game of Bundesliga, League One. I only really watch the EPL here, and watch Arsenal, my team, and watch a few other games here and there, watch the rugby, stuff like that. But all the bets that I've placed with Trademate, I'm sitting at about 4,500 bets. I reckon out of all those bets, I've probably watched 100 to 200 of those games, and most of them I had no idea about the league or this team or anything like that. So I think following the numbers is something that's completely underestimated in the market.
Personally, when I watch sport, usually I have some sort of investment in it. Like for me, I go to watch Spurs. I'm biased, and I think that bias plays a huge part in what you see. Even when you analyse a sport, it can play a part in what you see. You can look at numbers on anything, and you can twist it into the way that you see like fitting is the best fit. And at least if you're detached from the sport, you've got, and the event itself, you've got absolutely no sort of outside influence there, and it's nice to be able to look at just the numbers on their own. And to base your decisions off of that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, mate. And then moving on to your personal kind of betting yourself, you mentioned that you've tried a few strategies with... Oh, sorry, that was a microphone. You mentioned that you've tried a few strategies with exchange trading and stuff like that. What are you using nowadays? Are you implementing kind of your own personal strategies, or are you using any softwares or anything like that?
Actually, no. I occasionally look through like different data sets to revisit some old sort of projects that I had, that kind of thing. But no, like I've focused so heavily on other stuff, affiliate marketing online, and the other businesses that I spoke about earlier, and I look to expand those as much as I can. And yeah, I'm not betting or using any software myself. That's just the way that's the way my career's kind of gone, and I'm happy with the way it's gone.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And then to kind of wrap things up, I like to ask kind of two questions just on a really broad level. And you missed this question at the start of the article series with the industry experts, and I forgot to write this on the list of questions I sent you. But we asked what are the top 3 tips you would give to a new sports bettor, and since I've kind of sprung this on you, I don't mind if you only give me 1 or 2, or just things that come to your mind for any people beginning sports betting or just quite adolescent in their sports betting journey at the moment.
Well, the first thing which sprung to mind, I don't know if I'm going to get a concise 3 here, but the first thing which sprung to mind is stop trying to pick winners. Stop thinking that a winner is going, that you can predict a winner and that's a strategy. So just being accepting that there's wins and losses and you need to come out on top at the end of it. So that is my number 1 tip there. Number 2, don't rely on a staking plan. Betting, doing a monster of a bet and then coming out with a big pot of cash at the end of it, and then having loads and loads and loads of very low value bets that you know, negative yield bets. You might come out on top, but it doesn't mean that you're going to win in the long run. Your selection process could be completely flawed, but you think that you're winning because you've had a obscenely big win or a big stake. So you need to nullify that in your analysis.
Yeah, and just butting in there, mate. Yeah, I did notice that in your last answer in the article series, you did say that you don't recommend using the Kelly criterion. I'd love to hear you, for those who haven't read the article, for you to expand more on that, because obviously here at Trademate Sports we use the Kelly criterion, or at least we use we recommend 30% of the Kelly criterion. Can you kind of explain your views on that?
Yeah, the reason why I sort of expressed not, you know, I didn't express a great deal of interest in using that myself, and I don't necessarily recommend it, is mainly because your stakes are often dictated by bookmakers anyway, and if you happen to be a winner at a certain bookmaker, then you might have your stakes reduced down to a point where you wouldn't be able to apply certain staking techniques as well as you would just accepting that at bookmaker A I can only bet this amount, at bookmaker B I can only bet this amount, and that, you know, that's not you who dictates that. So I think that was probably my main point about that. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I spoke to a colleague here at work today, and I said he was thinking of starting with a big bankroll on the soft bookies, and I said, mate, you might as well either start with something smaller or maybe use a different staking strategy, because, you know, you might be able to get those, you know, using the Kelly criterion, you might be able to get those stakes in now, but give it a day or two, they might be all over, and you might be placing $1,000 on or $100 maybe on a Premier League game, but then when you're trying to bet on esports or a La Liga 2, whatever, then you might only be able to place the exact same odds, the exact same edge. You might only be able to get, you know, $10 or $20. Yeah, that's right, and it's also not just down to stake restrictions. It's actually just some bookmakers are cautious on certain outcomes. You know, they might not allow too many people to bet on a certain outcome, so they cap the amount of money they've accepted. And if you're even looking on the exchanges like Betfair to place a certain bet, there's no guarantee you're going to have the liquidity there, and these are problems that you don't really need to concern yourself with if you're betting on value consistently anyway. Yep. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, and then a last question, mate. What one thing would you like to change about the gambling industry?
If I was going to change one thing, it would be that players should be allowed to win. I think that there's been generations and generations and generations of bookmakers being the winner. They've already got their prices at a place where they can make profit anyway, and I think that I don't think there's a problem with them saying I don't want to accept too much on this and too much on this. That's okay, but to keep shutting down winners, I think is unfair, and I do believe that it will stop at some point. I think there will be some sort of rules in place that will. I think that the bookies will take it right to the line. They'll try and push back on those players as much as they can in whatever way they can, but I do think that eventually there might be a case where regulators are forced to allow that.
Why do you say that, mate?
I say it purely just because the way the industry is going, especially in the UK right now, is they do seem to be on the bookies' case quite a lot. The government seems to be pushing them down a little bit, squashing them. It's almost a bit like how back in like the 90s you could see big tobacco banners and stuff like that, and betting stuff has almost been crushed in that respect. Like, you can't advertise in the way you used to, and I think that with enough exposure to the way that winning players have been treated, I think that there could come a point where they might loosen up. That's a little bit of a hunch, but and maybe wishful thinking, but yeah, it could happen.
Well, I hope you're right, mate. I hope you are right, because I'm obviously still able to trade with some soft bookies, and hopefully I can trade on them for the rest of my life. There's a lot more value there, mate.
Yeah.
And then finally, mate, do you want to just let everyone know if I'm looking to find Punter2Pro, or anything you want to promote to the people, anything good you got coming out soon, where people can find Punter2Pro and find all your content?
Yeah, so it's punter2pro.com. I post as frequently as I can, but it kind of relies on when I get a bit of inspiration about something. So but yeah, so what I do is I've got a newsletter and people can sign up, and I usually do about once every month I sort of recap on something, or provide links to the latest articles, and yeah, so I recommend your listeners take a look.
Yeah, no, mate, it's been a pleasure having you on, and you've provided so much great insight, and I would really advise people to go over to your blog and read some of your articles. They are very, very informative. But other than that, thanks for listening, everyone. Please make sure before you stop listening to me, make sure you do a quick rate and review of the podcast. Should only take a couple minutes, and subscribe to us wherever you listen to the podcast. And then if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today, more so the value betting ones, I guess, make sure you check out the Trademate Sports value betting software. Start a free trial and start doing a bit of value betting today. But Toby, once again, thank you, mate, and I hope you've enjoyed your time with me.
Yeah, it's been great being here. Thanks a lot.
All right, cheers, guys. See you later.